November 7, 2017. It's the moment of truth. Sonic had just been graced by a wave of success thanks to Sonic Mania, a game developed by Sonic fans bringing him back to his roots. The love and dedication from the dev team was on full display, and it was published as an official Sonic product, earning the title of the highest rated Sonic game since Sonic Adventure 2. All eyes were on Sonic Team. It had been 4 years since their last Sonic game, being Sonic Lost World, and 6 years since their last universally praised Sonic game, Sonic Generations. So, what were they cooking? It looks a little something like this.
If anyone can hear this, we're almost out of time. Our cities are falling. The world is being conquered by Dr. Eggman. To take back our home, we'll need speed. We need you. You've got powerful gadgets and blistering speed. The war to take back the planet begins now.
This game was important. Not only was the Sonic team's return, but it looked like Sonic was ready to take storytelling seriously again. Instead of preventing Eggman from taking over the world, Sonic must now take back the world. A new character was also introduced in the form of the custom avatar, taking advantage of the Sonic fanbase's obsession over OCs. And finally, villains would be returning from across the franchise's history, and apart from Metal Sonic, the other 3 villains in this image have no reason to team up with Eggman. So many were awaiting the answers to the questions this game presented.
I'm gonna go change my pants real quick. I'll be right back.
It's like this game was made to print money and nothing else. Sonic fans were promised so much, but when the time came, we were fed very little. The game was only 3 hours long, and beatable in just 1 hour if you skipped all the cutscenes. The story was a cop-out, all the villains were just illusions, and it also failed to utilize Sonic's once rich world. The Sonic world has a military, super weapons, and a president, so you'd think that they'd be somewhat relevant to a story where Eggman finally wins. And to cap things off, the game was a sequel to Sonic Mania. The Mania team were basically asked to link the 2 games together, but at the same time, little information about Sonic Forces was actually provided to them. So now we have Sonic Mania's magical MacGuffin, the Phantom Ruby, showcasing completely different abilities compared to Sonic Force's Phantom Ruby. The former being used to teleport characters around and grant them permanent abilities, and the latter being used to make everyone schizophrenic. Sonic Team had done goofed, and us Sonic fans were left starving for 5 more years, with practically no good Sonic games. Team Sonic Racing wasn't a bad game per se, but the poor online multiplayer killed it off way too soon. And there was no reason to come back to it if no one could play with their friends. Sonic Colors Ultimate was an absolute disaster. Not only was it uninspired and lacking as a remaster, the game was poorly optimized to the point where the original Wii version of the game would load quicker. This isn't right, it's not normal! Sonic Origins was good because the classic games are good, therefore a remaster of the classic games are good, but it still didn't live up to the standards that everyone held for a remaster of a few 90s games. The games lacked certain features and was still unpolished, although not as bad as Sonic Colors Ultimate. At the high price point, and it's not surprising the game didn't sell well. But that brings us to today, the year of Sonic Frontiers, or I guess the year after Sonic Frontiers. A lot has happened. First of all, we got the reveal of what the open world would look like. Wait, Hideo Kojima's got— The initial gameplay reveal was met with overwhelming negativity, but as the year progressed and as more was shown off, the game did a 180. A lot of people were actually excited now, and they must be valid because Masahiro Sakurai said he was going to buy the game. It's been a good while since the game has released now. I've had time to play it through 3 times, and my views on the game are pretty solid. I've been pretty dormant on YouTube recently thanks to having a life, and haven't uploaded consistently for 5 years. I even have an entire Team Sonic Racing review written up, but I just never ended up recording it. But Frontiers has powered me up once again to dedicate a lot of time into a YouTube video, so y'all better like and share this video. Make it worth my time, please.
Like a new
Sonic is the most responsive he's felt in years, in the open world at least. You feel like you have complete control over him, and the last time it felt this good to control Sonic was literally never. And while most people probably play through the game using the 2 default control styles, the game allows you to go through into the settings and tweak how Sonic controls in terms of his speed and handling. This is the most control we've had ever over Sonic, but that's not necessarily a good thing. It seems like Sonic Team was prioritizing how well Sonic responded to the controller, but personally, I like how Sonic slips and slides and reacts to the environment. Part of the fun is learning to control Sonic and mastering him. Similar to racing games, racing in the car simply wouldn't be fun if you just stopped on a dime or made a tight turn without struggle or skill. Because they've been slowly removing this unpredictability from Sonic over the years, the platforming has devolved into just having to do what the stage wants you to do. Now, what makes it worse in Frontiers is that to traverse the world, very little platforming is involved, so there's nothing for my little monkey brain to be stimulated by. Sonic's speed isn't influenced by the environment either. He's gonna maintain a similar speed no matter if he's going up or down a hill. Recently, I purchased an Xbox so I could play the 360 version of Sonic Unleashed for the first time, and it genuinely pains me to say that my favorite incarnation of the boost formula is the first incarnation. Sonic Unleashed nailed the concept from the beginning. Sure, there are a few areas that could use refining, but I couldn't ask for anything more when it came to the foundation. The stomp doesn't stop your horizontal movement. The lightspeed dash could be used wherever, you could wall jump on any wall, grind rails weren't completely automated, and Sonic could drift, you know, like a race car. Over the years, Sonic Team has slowly simplified the gameplay style to a point where Boost Sonic is just an empty shell of its former self. Wall jumping, drifting, and the lightspeed dash can only be used when prompted to. A lot of this is the same in Frontiers, but hey, at least we have the lightspeed dash back as something Sonic can do without a prompt. Sonic Forces introduced a mechanic where Sonic could gain height by using his boost in the air, which is one thing I liked about it. In Forces, after doing a double jump followed by a boost, Sonic would be shot a little higher into the air, so the boost essentially acts as a third jump. This could only be done with the correct timing though, thanks to Sonic fans' favorite word, momentum. You have to boost while the double jump was still traveling upwards and combine the momentum from that with the boost. This kinda returns in Frontiers since you can use the momentum of pretty much anything and combine it with the boost to make Sonic fly really far in any direction, but putting unintentional game mechanics aside, the boost can still be used as the third jump. The only difference is that it always acts as a jump. No matter where your momentum is heading towards, the boost will fling Sonic a little upwards, and this can be quite frustrating when I just want to land on the ground. It flat out breaks the flow of the gameplay and is especially noticeable in 2D. There are a few additions, however, that I feel improve Sonic's moveset overall. First is the drop dash. If you hit the jump button 3 times and hold it down, Sonic can perform the drop dash, which shoots Sonic forward while he continues to roll. I don't know why we have to press it 3 times though, instead of just once and then hold, but I digress. The drop dash can be really fun to use, especially considering how fast it is compared to boosting. But again, thanks to the lack of momentum, the speed of the drop dash seems consistent when in action. There is absolutely no indication on whether you are speeding up or slowing down, yet the speedometer on the bottom right tells me otherwise. If you roll down a hill, the speedometer claims you gain speed, and if you go up, you lose speed, apparently. But again, nothing physically in the actual game makes you feel that way. If you run into an obstacle, Sonic won't even come to a full stop, he'll just keep rolling until he loses all his speed. Either way, to continue rolling, I technically do have to keep my momentum, so if I roll up a hill, Sonic will uncurl and continue on foot. What's odd though is that the game actually has classic rolling physics, but it isn't implemented for the drop dash. Sonic can visit cyberspace, which is a collection of traditional linear Sonic stages scattered around the open worlds. You can see here in this 2D cyberspace stage, Sonic can curl into a ball and roll just like the classic and adventure games. The physics are pretty similar to the classic games, albeit there is a speed cap. There's also very subtle up and down hill momentum in the open world, but I only found out because I was testing it out. Practically it has no real effect on the gameplay, but it's kinda odd seeing Sonic Team implement this in such a minor way, instead of having it actually be part of the main game and, the appeal of the movement. Either way, despite its odd implementation, the drop dash was definitely fun to use thanks to the environment determining how long it lasts. I think having more control while rolling would have been welcome though. When rolling, Sonic has very little control over the direction he's heading towards, which can lead players into getting stuck on objects or having to jump out of the roll to save themselves, which can be not very fun to do because when you jump out of a drop dash, you just slow down. You just feel like a big, heavy, fat guy. Another move returning is the bounce, this time activating if you hold in the stomp button. I didn't find it too useful in the open world, but it is hella fun to use in cyberspace. But, there's this really annoying drawback to it, and it's that you cannot do a homing attack or bounce again immediately after unless you do a double jump first. It completely breaks the flow of the gameplay, especially if you're a longtime Sonic fan and have a bit of muscle memory from Sonic Adventure 2. But you know, if you can remember to double jump, it's fine, I guess. It's very clear ever since the first gameplay reveal that the big selling point of Frontiers is the open world aspect of it. I mean, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? Sonic is fast and open worlds are known for being empty, so why not just play as a character who can travel from one side of the world to the other in just a few minutes? Sonic Team were hyping it up too by straight up saying it wasn't an open world, it was open zone. My mistake, Mr. John Sega. While I appreciate the attempt at being ambitious from Sonic Team, the way they were advertising it just rubbed me the wrong way. An open zone would be described as a marriage between your traditional open worlds and action platformers, but I don't think anything significant was done with either genre of games to consider Sonic Frontiers its own thing. Basically, the open zone was just a marketing buzzword. You could probably consider Mario Odyssey an open zone, so it didn't even sound as ambitious as they wanted it to. But enough about the marketing. How did the open zone turn out? I think the best way to put it is that the open worlds were designed to look impressive rather than to accommodate Sonic's gameplay style. While Sonic is no stranger to realistic looking landscapes, there were always creative liberties taken to make sure that the world would be compatible with the gameplay. To do this is fairly simple. Make sure the collision for the floor is nice and smooth, with any small details that may affect the terrain being purely aesthetic, and in worst case scenario, it's minimal, not affecting the physics and being barely noticeable, like the walking paths here. But as I've stated, in Frontiers, Sonic Team prioritized the world to be as realistic as possible, with every single detail translating to a point of collision, which is why Sonic jitters a lot in this game. And that's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is having Sonic fly up in the air thanks to a rock you couldn't see. To combat this issue, Sonic Team implemented a system that would have Sonic stick to the ground to make sure Sonic wasn't being launched away while interacting with every little dent on the floor, but it was really poorly implemented and results in a lot of inconsistencies. Sometimes Sonic will launch up and sometimes he'll stick to the ground. It just makes for a very frustrating experience. There's no obvious pattern to why Sonic reacts the way he does, at least not to the average player, so it makes it difficult to judge what would happen if Sonic runs off certain ledges. Another inconsistency I experienced was with the momentum maintained by Sonic's jump. I've heard a few reviews already say that Sonic doesn't maintain momentum when he jumps, but that's just straight up untrue. It's solely dependent on the terrain you're on. I found that Sonic tends to lose momentum when he jumps around ledges, which is probably also where Sonic Team applies the system that makes Sonic stick on the floor. You seeing the pattern here, gamers? But when I jump in an open stretch of grass, it's completely fine. I do lose speed at the latter end of the jump, but that's just how physics works, whatever. Sonic's activities in the open world don't just end with running though, he also has to interact with it. Frontiers introduces a crazy new move to Sonic called the side loop, which can be used both in exploration and combat. But in exploration, it feels really out of place. Most of the time it's the equivalent of going up to an interactable item and pressing X, but with extra steps. Oh, you want to interact with this? You better circle around it now. It's just tedious to perform. Sometimes it makes sense. The side loop makes this air-cutting blade effect, so using it around a pile of dirt to reveal something buried underneath just feels right, but unfortunately most of the time it's just a gimmicky version of a button prompt. It's a real shame that the game has to be this inconsistent in its ideas and execution, because, as I've said, this is the most responsive that Sonic has been, and having those controls mesh with the open world would have been a godsend. While I've stated I preferred the unpredictability of Sonic, I do think one of the reasons why a lot of people are turned off by Sonic is that unpredictability, and if Sonic Frontiers had synergy between the controls and the open world, I think the game could have performed a lot better, both commercially and critically. Not that it performed bad, but it could have been a lot better. One of the elements of Sonic Frontiers that was being pushed in interviews was the idea that the player can progress in any way they want. Cyberspace stages are scattered around the world and you're encouraged to find them since they're needed to collect Chaos Emeralds, but apart from the first two, the rest are optional. Fighting the mini-bosses? Optional. Collecting the memory tokens through exploration, which are required to progress the story? Optional. You still need to collect these collectibles, but how you collect them is up to you. It's a really neat concept, but not all methods of progression are built equal. Of course you can earn memory tokens and chaos emeralds through combat, but that would take you days. You can pretty much skip the entire islands if you use Big's fishing minigame on the 3rd and 5th islands, but on the 1st and 2nd? Yeah, no shot. The most efficient way to play the game is to fight mini bosses known as guardians. They drop portal gears that can be used to access cyberspace, which will then net you keys to unlock the chaos emeralds. Between all of that, collect any memory tokens you run into, and you should be all good. At least for the 1st and 2nd islands. Then for the 3rd and 5th islands, you grind out the fishing and you're all good. It makes me wonder what the point of giving players so much freedom is when so little of it actually means anything. I would have preferred a much more structured and linear gameplay loop if that was going to be the case. I'm not saying the game couldn't be open world, but similar to other open world games, it would have been better if they focused on a linear and carefully crafted storyline rather than having the player running around and doing whatever they wanted. The proper gameplay loop of collecting the Chaos Emeralds, I will admit, is fun, but it's mainly the token collecting that soured my feelings on the open world. The problem is that most memory tokens aren't discoverable as part of exploring the environment. Instead, you'll be spending a lot of time adjusting your camera to find them floating in the sky and trying to find out how you can get there. And these memory tokens are actually hard to spot because of the low render distance, so I would constantly have to keep opening the map and setting waypoints because the game lacked a minimap. This isn't too much of an issue if you love to explore and run around every inch of maps, but that's just not how I play video games. I like to focus on main objectives unless there's something of substance to pull me away, such as the fun side stories of the Yakuza games, or the straight up masterfully designed open world of Breath of the Wild. Sonic Frontiers doesn't present me with interesting platforming because most of it is automated and very simple, therefore I was dissuaded to explore. The 3rd island is probably the worst example of this since most of the platforming is in 2D, so it's very easy to lose your sense of direction, and again this is a result of the world not being built for Sonic, so they just put all the platforming stuff floating in the sky. On the flip side, collecting Chaos Emeralds is a pretty well designed process. Everything you need is actually inhabiting the world, so you actually have to engage with it to some degree. The Guardians have a higher render distance, so they're easy to spot from far away. The cyberspace portals do kind of blend into the world because they look like rocks, but if you get close to one, an icon will appear on your UI, and even if you do need to look at the map, you won't need to find as many portals as you do memory tokens. I think the game should have focused on player choice within the confines of the gameplay loop. Asura is one of the guardians you can fight on the 1st island, and defeating it will net you 1 portal gear. But if you think outside the box, you can finish the fight with 3 portal gears. It's not too difficult to figure out how to get these 2 extra gears. Sonic simply needs to side loop around the Guardian's feet. But my point is that if all the Guardian fights had more challenging hidden portal gears like this, the game would be a lot more interesting because I don't think any other Guardian has extra portal gears. If this was the norm, I would be encouraged to approach these battles as a puzzle before engaging in combat, which I think is a more Sonic-y way to give players some leeway, some choice and options on how they play the game. If they're creative or skilled enough to get the extra portal gears, then they progress through the game quicker, but if not, all it does is simply slow them down. Cyberspace stages actually do this very well, because simply beating them won't reward you with a Chaos Emerald. You'll need to complete a few different missions within them too. Skilled players should be able to complete extra missions and unlock Chaos Emeralds by only playing a few cyberspace stages, but if you're a VTuber, you should be able to take advantage of the larger pool of cyberspace stages and do the easier missions instead.
That's fun. What do you get? What do you get? What do you get? What do you get?
But with what we got, there just aren't enough stages for the VTubers, so the extra missions are made really easy. And of course you have the exploration and fishing to make up for the lack of skill as well. But that's the thing really, Sonic Team is understaffed and don't receive the budget they need. They can't develop intricate Guardian fights that'll keep the player engaged, or enough difficult cyberspace stages that can be used as a crutch for VTubers. So instead they have to use exploration as a crutch. Exploration that simply boils down to finding a box and punching it, or they just lower the difficulty so that most people can complete the harder objectives with little skill. They have to litter the open world with very simple and menial tasks just so there's something to do at all in these massive maps. The scope of the game was just too big for the budget and time Sega was willing to give Sonic Team, and it really shows with the open worlds and how they were designed. Giving players too much freedom was also a detriment to the Supersonic Titan boss fights. I'm sure most of you get the picture with the Titans by now. They let Sonic be the coolest he's ever been since Black Knight, and the music just straight up bangs. These bosses are probably the best part of the game, especially with how they're implemented as an extension of Sonic's moveset. In most Supersonic bosses, Sonic will be given a completely new playstyle, having everything you've learned up to that point of the game being irrelevant to mastering the fight. In Frontiers, Super Sonic shares the same moveset that regular Sonic has, the only difference being that he can fly and doesn't take damage. The challenge comes from having to finish off the boss before your ring count drops to 0 as they drain over time. I love these bosses, but there's this big issue that holds them down, and it's that they're too easy. The first boss will probably be the most difficult, as players may not be prepared by entering the boss with a low ring count and generally not being as powerful thanks to a lack of upgrades, but because the game needs to let the player play however they want, the bosses never increase in difficulty. The last Titan boss is as easy as the first because they need to be beatable by a Super Sonic with the minimum amount of rings and no upgrades. But because most people are going to upgrade anyways, to most players the bosses just become easier. The second one even gives you rings mid-battle. And while the second and third bosses introduce unique ideas, the final one introduces its little bullet hell attacks that aren't even difficult to dodge and has a massive gun that's only used once during a quick time event. The boss is also just generally poorly designed. There's a moment where it stops taking damage and there's no indication of what you should do to make the battle progress. So not only is it ridiculously easy, but it doesn't leave much of an impact on the player and frustrates them due to poor design choices. Something I find strange though is that the normal enemies and guardians do actually progress in difficulty as the game goes on, so I have no idea why that doesn't apply to the Titan bosses. Actually, never mind, I do. It's probably because the Titan bosses aren't optional. But while we're on the topic of combat, why don't we ask ourselves... I mean, I've already technically answered this. It's because they want to give players a lot of freedom and choice, but there are also certain aspects where it just shouldn't be easy, or it should at least require brain power. It's been way too long since a Sonic game gave players a good challenge, and Frontiers disappoints again. The big new mechanic in Frontiers is the combat, so let's begin with that. Before the game release, personally, I was really excited for the combat. I love the Yakuza games, and while I haven't played it, Metal Gear Rising's combat looks sick, so combining that with the speed and style of Sonic the Hedgehog is pretty much the greatest idea in the world, but it always hinges on execution. I actually prefer the Werehog combat over Sonic Frontiers, but it seems like the Frontiers combat is being more positively received. The only reason I think people like Sonic Frontiers more is that the combat is actual Sonic the Hedgehog combat, and it never overstays its welcome. But if I were to be locked into combat for an hour and I had the choice between Frontiers and Unleashed, I would pick Unleashed. Sonic Frontiers combat simply lacks variety or depth. Most of the moves you unlock pretty much do the same thing, and that's do damage. Some do more damage than others. Some do ranged damage because Sonic is just a Super Saiyan now, I guess, and the only unique move would be the quick side loop, which lets Sonic do the regular side loop quickly in combat. The side loop takes a while to perform because you have to run around an enemy, so a quick side loop allows the combat to flow better. There is a catch though. As Sonic successfully executes attacks, a meter will build up, and once it's filled up, you can use the quick side loop 2 times before it depletes. It's a pretty strange way to implement a... what are these called? Power meters? SP? Anyways, in other games, these meters are usually for one use, or you just need a certain amount of it filled up minimum to use the moves linked to it. The way Frontiers has the meter implemented can make the game feel kind of random, like sometimes it'll be half full and blue or half full and red, and the meter won't fill up again until you fully depleted it, so you could be running around the game for 2 hours and find you only have 1 quick side loop to use rather than 2. Sonic also has a parry in this game which slows down time when performed successfully. The players will then have the choice of beating up enemies around them manually or hit this button prompt for a stylish finisher. It's a cool concept, but in execution it's way too overpowered. The fun of using a parry comes from the fact that you have to time it well so it feels satisfying when you pull it off. In Frontiers, the parry has a 15-second window, and if you do it in the air, Sonic just floats there. Imagine how fun it would be to jump into an enemy as they attack and you hold down the parry, but instead of floating, Sonic actually obeys the laws of physics and gets an offensive parry in. But no, because the parry has such a big window, a lot of the times I find myself breaking the flow of the battle because I see an enemy charging up an attack and immediately hold down parry a good few seconds before a hit actually lands on me. There's also a recovery attack you can do if Sonic is hit, and it's hard to activate since you'll probably be spamming any button other than the one you need to hit, so you'll just end up pressing the wrong button and losing the prompt. There's not really much to talk about other than that in terms of combat skills. As I've said, the other attacks aren't very unique, and combat is mainly just whether you decide to use a move that does more damage or not. I remember watching the combat reveal video when it was released and wondered why the person playing wasn't always dishing out the overpowered attacks, and thought maybe there was a power meter similar to the one in Phantasy Star Online 2, where most moves can only be used if you have enough of what they call photon points. Actually, I was playing Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis recently and found the combat to be a lot more engaging despite it not being any more complex compared to Sonic Frontiers. And that's simply thanks to the photon point system. If you have no more photon points, you're back to your basic attack, and your basic attack will fill up the photon points faster. On top of that, there are some moves that have special abilities. I found using one move would activate a passive attack that deals damage to anyone nearby. There was also a move that let me spam my gun while zipping around the enemy with full control, and I could also do this cool boxing move, where I dodged before striking the enemy. The combat overview for Sonic Frontiers even says that Sonic has a move that lets him dodge attacks while attacking.
It's a fast and stylish way to hit your enemies hard while avoiding incoming fire.
The controls are also fidgety, with a lot of moves requiring the player to press certain buttons in a specific order. This can get messy when one of those buttons is used for boosting, so if you attack right out of just running around, you can activate an attack that you didn't intend to. I've also had multiple experiences where certain attacks just don't respond, and it's no doubt because there's a battle system baked right on top of platformer controls. Quick side looping can also be frustrating to use against these group of enemies since you need to side loop to break their shield. But after using the quick side loop specifically, the game will most likely auto-target a different enemy, so the best way to play is to break your flow and adjust Sonic to retarget the side looped enemy. Dodging is also annoying because you have to be locked onto an enemy to do it, and it works similar to a quick step, so if you press the right bumper, you dodge right, left bumper for dodging left. I don't know why Sonic just doesn't dodge the direction the analog stick is pointing to, but because I can only use it in two directions, I stopped using it entirely. The enemies themselves also bog down the experience quite a bit. A lot of them are way too simple, attacks are performed way too slowly, and the hitboxes for their attacks are way too wide sometimes. Like, how did I even get hit by this? It's another factor that makes the dodge feel so useless. Not that it makes the game any harder, because again, overpowered parry. Guardian patterns also boil down to engaging with some tedious gimmick before you can go sicko mode on them, but upgrading Sonic enough so that you can beat these guys up before they force you back into the gimmick can be satisfying. The only gimmick I think was fun though was the sumo one, where Sonic used the arena to bounce around and overwhelm the Guardian. Shark was a good idea, but poor in execution. It just boiled down to a long QuickTime event. If it was shorter and the gimmick was changed from QuickTime events to a balancing mechanic, then I think the fight would have been easily one of the best. The worst gimmicks are the ones that involve circle grind rails, because they're really unforgiving for no reason. If you're hit, you're most likely to lose all your rings, even if you've been a good boy and upgraded your defense. And because you're on grind rails above the ground, there's no way to recover those rings. I know I wanted the game to be hard, but having these random difficulty spikes is not how you do it. And when you consider that you can lightspeed dash to recover drop rings quickly, and summon rings from using the side loop on nothing, these random difficulty spikes just come off as cheap. And you know what else is cheap? Cyberspace. Cyberspace is actually really well implemented into the game, as I've already stated. I love how it's objective oriented, so when playing through, I'm doing more than running to the goal. I have to make sure I don't drop my rings, I gotta collect all the red star rings, and I gotta beat the stage fast enough to get an S rank. I definitely felt more engaged playing the cyberspace stages compared to playing Sonic Forces, and that's because the game gave me a real reason to do the side missions, because it helped me progress through the story, and if I could do them all in one run, I would progress through faster. I also really like how you can't air boost again until you hit the ground. In previous games, you could air boost and interact with anything to gain the air boost back, but having to figure out when the best time to air boost was to keep my flow going kept the stages engaging. The stomp also acts the same way, but unlike the air boost, I don't like it. The point of the stomp on certain things is to actually spam it. It's especially fun on these little... what are they even called? It's especially fun on these little bouncy sticks, and you'll probably encounter more than one bouncy stick before you hit the ground, so these stages are designed to encourage people to use the stomp multiple times in the air, yet you can only do it once. So why would they design the levels like that? I don't know, maybe because the levels were taken from other games. Another problem with Sonic Frontiers is the reuse of level design. While reusing good level design is definitely a step up from what Sonic Forces had to offer, because the controls are different, it's good level design for a character that wasn't designed for it. Sonic Unleashed and Generations had a lot of moments where the stages were simple in design, but it worked because Sonic was a chaotic little gremlin boy. In Frontiers, however, he just do be running, that's for sure. The Sonic Adventure 2 stages are nice to revisit, and because the gameplay in that game was completely different from Sonic Frontiers or any other Boost game, you can traverse the stages in new ways, but Sonic Adventure 2 was a game built around momentum, so there are a few areas that lack the nuance Sonic Adventure 2 had. The best example of this is Rail Canyon. Adventure 2's grinding mechanics was built around the player's ability to balance well to keep the speed going, but in Frontiers there's no balancing, so it's just a stretch of rails that present no challenge. Then you have gimmicks like the fan spring that rises each time you homing attack it. It works exactly the same in Frontiers, but the way Adventure 2 handled how the homing attack felt makes it a lot more satisfying to repeatedly spam it, since the animation and sound design made it feel more like a free-flowing bounce, while Frontiers feels like it's a lot more rigid and scripted. Having these reused stages also means they'll inconsistently shift in quality. One stage will be a copy of a good Unleashed stage, and the next could be a blander original stage. The original stages aren't bad by any means, but they could be a lot better. The drop dash is also really inconsistent to use, usually not rolling down slopes as fast as you'd hope. In 2D sections, it'll tend to bug out, because they just decided not to program it for 2D use. If you hold the control stick up or down while drop dashing, the game will probably shoot Sonic along the Z-axis that Sonic can't use because it's in 2D. And if a 2D stage likes to bend along the Z-axis, you'll have to position the analog stick accordingly, or the drop dash will get stuck on the invisible walls, keeping Sonic trapped in 2D. But aside from that, Sonic just feels so much worse in cyberspace. How Sonic handles is the same for everyone, the game settings will not affect it, but it's not even the same as the default high speed style that you can pick at the beginning of the game, and that style was tweaked specifically for people who are used to playing Sonic games. So you would assume that the game devs would want to apply that style to the traditional Sonic game part of the game. When turning, Sonic feels uncontrollable, and not in a realistic challenging way like in Unleashed, just in a way that feels gross and stiff. The quickstep returns and it shoots you way too far and changes the direction Sonic is traveling towards for some reason. Sonic's top speed is overall just too slow, and there's this annoying pause whenever Sonic does a homing attack on an enemy. I'm pretty sure this is the first Sonic game that discourages you from attacking badniks. Light speed dash also kills all your speed after using it. These stages just feel awful to play, and while they're fun when you put it into the context of using them to progress the game, coming back to speedrun or just enjoying a traditional platforming stage is not fun at all. While I think Sonic Frontiers hits harder upon a first playthrough, I found it to be easier to replay Forces stages because the story is baked into the stage. Stuff is happening, characters talk to you, there's spectacle that I can enjoy making up for the poor gameplay, but there's no spectacle in Frontiers because the stages are completely disconnected from the story. I will say Frontiers is also harder to S-rank compared to Forces, but not by much. Newer players may struggle, but I was chilling as a returning Sonic fan. Red star rings are also placed in the most obvious areas, so there's little incentive to slow down and explore. If you missed one, it's on an alternative path, or you're just blind. The ring count requirement is also way too low most of the time. Not all cyberspace stages are easy though. There's one stage that pulls from a Sonic Unleashed hard mode DLC, and this 2D grinding stage is tight on rings, so you'll need to choose your path carefully to make sure you have enough rings before reaching the end. Oh, and you can't forget the infamous stage 1 too. But other than a few outliers, us older Sonic fans really only have Sonic Unleashed for difficulty, huh? Even the short challenges in Sonic Frontiers present very little challenge, to the point where I question why they're even in the game. Also, I just realized you can't run on water. When landing on a new island, Sonic will have no knowledge of the terrain, so he'll need to run around and find little challenges that unlock the map piece by piece. And they're just so meaningless. They don't last long enough to be annoying or tedious, but they aren't fun to complete either. There are good ideas, don't get me wrong, like having to skydive through every ring, jump rope, and the parry challenges, but each idea is just poorly executed. The skydive challenges have little to no obstacles, the jump rope can be easily cheesed because the parry lets Sonic fly, and I'm sure you guys can figure out why the parry challenges are meaningless. Some highlights are the reworked tile puzzles from Sonic Boom Razz-a-Lyric, which at the very least decided to be a puzzle. Compared to Sonic Boom Razz-a-Lyric. It's not the hardest thing in the world, but you need to engage with your brain at the very least to complete them. I also like the ones where Sonic has to homing attack a ball through some rings. The trajectory of the ball depends on Sonic's positioning and the direction he's facing. It's not very difficult though, because you have a lot of time to do it, so if they just simply shortened the countdown, it could have been solid. Same applies to racing challenges where Sonic has to get to a point in the open world before time runs out. They're probably my favorite because it's just what Sonic is at his core, but because you're given a lot of time, it's really easy to complete. But I think you guys can see the pattern here. A lot of the game can be fixed by just adjusting a few numbers. Make the parry shorter, shorten the time limits, increase rings required by the end of the stage. I mean, we still have to deal with some goofy controls, but I'd feel a lot more engaged with the game. At the moment, there's just no satisfaction from mastery in this game because there's no reason to master anything. That's most of what I have to say about the gameplay. There's still a decent amount of stuff I want to talk about, but that would affect the flow of the video, so I don't know, just ask me on Twitter or something when Elon Musk finally decides to unban me. But now let's move on to what I was most excited for in the game. While the gameplay looked really disappointing before its launch, the story on the other hand, we knew little about. So, does Frontiers bring Sonic back to his glory days, when Sonic was that free spirit that inspired many kids into inserting themselves into the lore? Well... First off the bat, I love the tone of Sonic Frontiers. It's been way too long since we had a serious Sonic story.
None of this is good, Vector. That's why it's called war.
It's been way too long since we had a serious Sonic story that was written meaningfully. The story focuses on Sonic having to save his friends as they get trapped in these weird red jars. It doesn't take long to free them from the jars, but they're still stuck between realities, so it's up to Sonic to tear down the walls between those realities. That doesn't sound very safe. Frontiers, for the first time in over a decade, allows Sonic to showcase his specific dynamics between each character. Their interactions together feel like they matter, and by the end of the game, all three of Sonic's friends come out of the experience ready for their next adventure. Amy promises to travel the world to inspire others. Knuckles wants to travel the world as well, but instead he wants to learn about it. And Tails wants to stop hanging around Sonic so that he can learn to become his own person. It's a very stark contrast from the last 13 years of Sonic stories where nothing mattered, and when a character needed character development, it was swiped away. The closest we got to this was in Lost World, where Sonic and Tails fight like Sonic was having an affair with Eggman, but that was just poorly written and out of character. Sonic Frontiers tries for a course correction. Tails had been relegated to a less physically active sidekick in the recent games, so let's have Tails break out of that and move forward on his own. Amy is just a stereotypical fangirl, so give her more character, bring out her sympathetic side from Adventure. And Knuckles has been stuck on an island all day. Fans have been complaining for years, asking why Knuckles is involved in stories where the Master Emerald he's meant to be guarding is irrelevant. So let's have him explore the world. Wait, what's gonna happen to the Master Emerald? Alright, so yeah, I do feel like the story is meaningful and moves these characters forwards in some ways, but I don't feel like it's executed very well. Yep, sorry guys, Sonic Frontiers yet again has ideas I like that weren't done in the best ways. Amy's arc is just really weak in general. For a bit of context, in the game you run around helping these little guys called Cocos. The ancient civilization created these Cocos as accessories, but after the ancients were wiped out, these Cocos gained sentience and lived to bring peace to the ancient souls. The Coco that Amy helps out is looking for her lost love, and when she meets him, Sonic and Amy experience a flashback that shows two ancients who were lovers reuniting in the middle of a battlefield before they were bombed to death. This somehow inspires Amy because it was a love that transcended time or something, and now she wants to share all her love with the world. If I didn't know better, then I would have thought Amy wanted to become a prostitute. I just don't understand the arc. The love didn't transcend time, it was a soul looking to find peace, and what does sharing love even mean? I know that I said Amy wanted to inspire others earlier, but that was just to make it not sound stupid, so I could bamboozle you with the stupidness later on. Which is now, actually. I think Tails' arc is nice as it addresses how inconsistent he's been written over the years, but it kinda just comes out of nowhere. One moment he's fine, then the next he's like, Sonic, I saw a shadow version of me telling me I was useless and I was trapped in a jar. Wah! I'm glad they addressed it, but more foreshadowing would have been cool. The moment Tails is released from the jar, he's so calm about everything until the time comes where he gets all sad. Okay, Future Blue here. I'm here to make an addendum. There actually is foreshadowing, but because of the way the story is structured and all the references the game makes already, it kind of went over my head. I only realized this when I was editing the video, so yeah. I would now say that I would want stronger foreshadowing. So there is foreshadowing, I just don't think it's enough. Compared to Amy and Knuckles, whose character development comes from a certain moment, forcing them into a realization, the nature of Tails' character development comes from a buildup of emotions, because he's been thinking about this since he was released from the jar, so we need to be able to see that buildup of emotions throughout the story, and not just a couple of foreshadowing moments that could go over players' heads. Knuckles decides to explore the world, but the thing is, during Sonic Adventure 2, he was a treasure hunter, so clearly he's dabbled in some world exploring. He acts like he's trapped on the island, but again, as shown in previous games, he's not.
世界一のトレジャーハンター
Since the story of Frontiers actually reveals a bit more Angel Island lore, wouldn't it make more sense to have Knuckles embark on a journey to learn more about the very island he lives on? But instead, what leads Knuckles to his conclusion was him envying Sonic's freedom. Oh well. Apart from Sonic's epic harem, we have two other characters to talk about, Dr. Eggman and the new character Sage. But they're best left after I mansplain the big overall plot to you. The adventure begins when Sonic, Tails, and Amy head towards the Starfall Islands in search of the Chaos Emeralds for absolutely no reason. But thanks to Eggman reactivating the technology on the island, they get sucked into cyberspace, with Sonic being the only one able to escape thanks to his Sigma grind set.
I have no master, except the wind that blows free.
While everyone else was trapped in cyberspace and saw weird hallucinations, Sonic's mind was so clear that his hallucinations were just places he'd run through in the past, letting him traverse through cyberspace with ease. Having Sonic be the only one who could truly escape cyberspace is a really cool concept. He's always been that character whose mind was always in the right place. Not even the powers of Dark Gaia could corrupt him, so it makes a lot of sense that he was the only one who couldn't be contained. Sonic then finds himself on the island, and he hears a voice egging him on to destroy the Titans, and because Sonic is completely lost and has no real direction, he decides to listen to the voice. Soon after, he frees Amy, meets Sage, and gets beaten up by the first Titan. Sonic's defeat convinces him that he needs the Chaos Emeralds to help him, so he goes off and finds them. Along the way, we meet the Coco that I mentioned earlier, and from here, it gets interesting, because this is when we get our first glimpse of the ancient civilization that used to live on the island. And they look very similar to Chaos! And for good reason.
They're relatives of Chaos, the god of destruction.
While there is a structured story, a lot of details are left ambiguous if you just do all the story quests. If you want to get the full picture, you're gonna have to talk to all the characters every chance you have. I'm not a big fan of it, but it has kind of worked in the past though. In Sonic Adventures, Sonic's story is really simple, with Sonic just running into other characters and reacting accordingly until he ends up stopping Eggman. Same with Adventure 2, where all anyone is doing in the hero story is focusing on protecting Earth. It isn't until you play the other stories where you realize there's something bigger going on, like with the ancient Echidna tribe in Adventure, and Shadow's backstory in Adventure 2. I think it's a neat way to show Sonic is a moment liver. He isn't bogged down by the memories of the past or anything, and is continuously working with what he has in the moment. For example, in Adventure, Amy protects Gamma, an Eggman robot, from Sonic, and he just fully puts his trust in her. And Sonic knows very little about Shadow's backstory. He knows that Gerald Robotnik created Shadow to destroy the Earth, but that's all. Actually, I think Sonic's completely unaware that Shadow actually witnessed Maria's death, and that Amy jogging Shadow's true memories is the reason why he decided to help last minute. Sonic just lets Shadow help because their goals just suddenly aligned. I don't even remember NIDS, which is a fictional disease Maria was dying from, being mentioned in any of the stories. I genuinely thought that NIDS was retconned into Shadow's backstory in Shadow's epic spin-off, but also mainline video game. But NIDS was always a thing since Adventure 2, you just wouldn't know about it without reading some random magazine. Point is though, I think those stories handle ambiguity very well because Sonic was unaware while the player was aware. Frontiers, on the other hand, is very weird about it. The game is pretty much the inverse. Sonic is the one uncovering the mystery. He's the one who knows the most out of all the characters, excluding Sage. But because of Sonic's personality and the way the story and game is structured, everything we learn is interesting as a Sonic fan discovering new tidbits about the Sonic lore. However, those tidbits don't really contribute to the overall story. In the game, you can unlock voice recordings from Eggman. One of them implies the ancients evolved into Chao over thousands of years, and Sonic just doesn't care. There's also another moment where Sonic comments on Chaos Emeralds being from another planet. He finds it strange since he's been casually using their powers for many years, completely oblivious to their true origin. But you'll only know that if you talk to Sage at this one specific spot. Sonic helping the Cocos is only an excuse to see more flashbacks to things that don't matter. You could argue that it's just Sonic's thing to help people, but he expresses to Amy how he'd rather help her over the Cocos, and it's not like Sonic helps all the Cocos by the end of the game. He only helps the Cocos that his friends find. Otherwise, the rest of the Cocos are still not at peace. I wouldn't mind if the Cocos he helped were actually relevant by the end of the game, but instead it all feels tacked on and distracts from the main story. Once Sonic's done with them, they died, they're dead, they're gonzo, you never see them again. It's just an excuse for flashbacks that reveal more about the Ancients' history, but it doesn't contribute to the story at all. There's all this stuff about the Chao and the Chaos Emeralds being from an alien planet, and how they escaped the mysterious being called the End, whose entire purpose is to seek out and destroy planets, but a lot of that just doesn't matter. I don't see why this island couldn't just be the isolated home of the Ancients before the End attacks, and they just try to defend it. You could argue that the Ancients need an excuse to create cyberspace, but we live in the world with the internet. Humans didn't flee their home planet for the internet to be created. The Ancients just wanted to store and share information, and they could have, especially since they live on 5 separated islands. Having something to send information back and forth would be useful. One argument I could make against my own point is that the Ancients needed to be aliens because they didn't expand out of their island, because that's where they landed, and they didn't have time to build a society elsewhere. But honestly, it should have been written so that the Ancients were spreading out from the Starfall Islands and exploring the Earth. It would have been an easy way to link Unleashed Gaia temples to the Ancients, since that's caused a bit of confusion for Sonic lore masters such as Cybershell.
They kind of explained that shit's been going on since like the beginning of time, and the Chaos Emeralds kind of seem like an important part of it, but, you know, whatever.
And because at this point in time the Ancients were the only intelligent living beings on Earth, it would make sense for most of them to return to the Starfall Islands and contribute to the fight against the End. But let's stop dwelling on the past and return back to the present. So while Sonic continues his formulaic adventure of collecting stuff and fighting the Titans, Eggman and Sage talk in cyberspace. The ideas present for Sage and Eggman are really good. Sage is an AI that Eggman created to extract information about cyberspace, but upon establishing a link between Sage and cyberspace, the entirety of the island awakens. All the robots the Ancients had activate. The Titans activate, and this also means that the End, whom the Ancients had trapped inside cyberspace, has a chance of escaping. So Sage, who now has access to the entirety of cyberspace, traps Eggman in it to keep him safe from the End, which is actually the worst idea she could have come up with. If the End succeeds in destroying the planet, wouldn't that also cause cyberspace to be destroyed? So isn't the best course of action to force Eggman into leaving the planet? Or is cyberspace kind of like a pocket universe that the Ancients miraculously created and the portals simply act as a gateway to it, and that's why it can just kind of exist on its own? Despite that weird lack of explanation, I like the little foreshadowing here where Eggman thinks he's trapped in cyberspace by pure accident and asks Sage to make it her #1 priority to get him out. Sage then responds with, "But keeping you safe is my #1 priority," implying that finding a way out, which she can probably just do on command, would clash with her programming to keep Eggman safe. It doesn't make sense upon your first playthrough, and I thought it was just bad writing, but upon seeing it a second time, it clicked. In an earlier cutscene, she also says that she's trying to find a safe option for Eggman to get out, which again foreshadows that she is in full control, but upon the first playthrough, the player will just think, oh, so Eggman probably can't survive escaping cyberspace. During their time in cyberspace though, Eggman and Sage begin to form a father and daughter bond. It's very clear during the first interaction in the game where Eggman treats Sage respectfully and asking her to keep up the good work. Later he even laughs at her stories and lets her know that he's proud of her. It's all very good, and I love the idea of humanizing Eggman. They did it in Sonic Adventure 2 and have never built upon that since. Frontiers even has Eggman recall how Maria would get so much love and praise during his childhood despite having been killed, while he was alive and achieving so much with little recognition. It hints to a reason as to why Eggman fell down a path of villainy, and that's really neat as a little side detail. But Eggman and Sage's relationship, which is one of the main focuses of the game, feels a little shallow. Maybe because Eggman and Sage's interactions aren't very interesting to watch. It's just the two of them standing around having a conversation in the same location. A lot of Sonic Frontiers cutscenes can basically be boiled down to that. Characters mostly just standing around and talking because half the cast can't even touch the environment. But what makes it worse with Sage and Eggman is that they can interact with the environment, so the fact that they aren't diminishes the value of what's happening. But I think one of the biggest things that ruined the Eggman and Sage relationship was Sage's flashback moment on the third island. In the scene, Sage cries about how she wished she had a relationship akin to the one Sonic and Tails have. Two people who treat each other like family despite not being biologically related. Then we get flashbacks to stuff that happened not so long ago with a really bad song backing it up. I found myself asking why Sage was crying in the first place. Just moments ago, Eggman said that he was proud of her, so it's very clear that the family born of love and not genetics she wanted is forming. It would have made more sense if Eggman was treating her coldly at first, and then after the flashback, he starts treating her like a daughter. Ultimately, I love the idea of Eggman having a father and daughter relationship, but it's muddied by the lack of anything happening and the inconsistent writing. There are also other quirks about the writing I don't like, such as how they tried to tie the gameplay mechanics into the story. I don't think we need an explanation for why there are grind rails all over the island. It just makes the lore more messy than it needs to be. The fact that they also tried to weave these signs into the lore just makes the whole thing goofy. Like, they look like road signs, so I'm happy to accept them as a gameplay quirk and nothing more. I know Sonic and Knuckles are rivals, but why does Sonic need to convince Knuckles to help him find the Chaos Emeralds? I feel like Knuckles would have been down to help. In fact, Knuckles just asks to bring him up to speed, and Sonic responds as if he's trying to make a deal with Knuckles. The two also do this staring motion that they've never done before, and it's just straight up awkward. I know what it's trying to convey, but there's no reason to act all rivalry in the scene, and usually gestures like these are accompanied by effects or are done really stylistically, because you know, in real life people don't act like this. Sonic calling Tails his little bro is weird too. I don't think he's ever done that before in the games. It comes off as anime writing to me, like when an anime character calls their big brother Oni-chan, and the anime gets dubbed and it just gets directly translated as Big Bro, but then it sounds awkward because English speakers don't tend to refer to their siblings that way. Then there are the references. It's not as bad as people make them out to be, but the really bad ones stick out like a sore thumb. Sonic saying, "I'll be back before you can do a fortune card reading," is so forced. Comparing the waterfall to the one in Mystic Ruins is also goofy. Like, has Sonic only seen one waterfall in his life? Tails comparing power levels to Dark Gaia didn't feel appropriate for the situation, and this weird screenshot of Sonic 3 straight up had no correlation with what was being discussed. Generally, I also don't like the idea of Team Sonic Racing and Sonic Riders being canon either. Team Sonic Racing introduced Dompa Motors, which is described as the biggest producer of cars across the universe, yet in previous games, Sonic's world is much like ours, as in both peoples are stuck on Earth. We don't have the technology to branch out to other planets. Only Eggman has done that due to his massively insane IQ. And I don't like Sonic Riders being canon because I always interpreted it as a futuristic Earth. And Eggman is straight up just running a legitimate business, plus the character's redesigns always made it apparent to me that this was not the same Sonic cast we knew. That being said, I liked all the other references, like how Sage references Eggman working with Sonic in Sonic Heroes and Adventure 2. Again, I've already mentioned the Maria reference. Tails also mentions Infinite when discussing how inconsistent his character is, and Sonic brings up how he saved him from prison and saved Station Square. And sure, these idle lines do sound like they're from Family Guy, but at the same time, they're idle lines, like you literally have to stand still for them to play. Like, you're not gonna hear them that often, and they're still fun references.
Parts of this island are really lovely. I should cream here sometime.
But going back to the negatives, I find Sonic to be incredibly stupid in this game. He's dead set on saving his friends, despite it being very clear he's screwed once he does. In the end, it all works out, but Sonic had no idea it would. Maybe it would have been nice if Tails promised Sonic to save him if anything happens. Although Sonic has been brought back from the dead before, so it would have been nice if Sonic somehow referenced that, and that way we as an audience would understand why he's being so reckless. I understand that part of Sonic's character is to be impatient and reckless, but I've never seen Sonic do anything that made me think, wow, this guy's dumb. The ending seems extremely rushed too. Sonic reflects very little on Sage's role after she dies right in front of him. It just felt so anticlimactic, especially after we've had moments like in Sonic Adventure 2, where he looks out into space and thinks about Shadow. It would have been really nice to have Sonic talk about Sage to his friends in the mid-credit scene instead of doing this weird joke where Sonic was like, "That was fun," and everyone's like, no, that was not fun. It's very clear that Sonic Frontiers was a rushed project. It's a miracle that 60 developers were able to produce an open-world Sonic game with the reception it received. But when I played the game, it was very obvious that these devs did not get the time they needed. A couple of cyberspace stages had paths that led nowhere. I already mentioned the oversight of a jump rope challenge existing in a game where you can stay still in the air for a good 15 seconds. The render distance for certain objects are too low on high-spec consoles. It seems like they made it low for the Switch port but didn't want to make it higher for real gamers. This line during the final boss suggests that you have to work with all the Titans to defeat the end, but they scrapped it with Sonic only working with Sage. The final boss in general is just a reused minigame. The fact that the final 2 islands are just the first island is sus as hell. I think what happened was that there were only 3 islands planned out, but the game was running out of development time and Sega wouldn't delay it. Izuka talked about how difficult it was to get a 1-year delay for the game, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got that 1-year delay because they pitched to Sega how they were going to have 5 islands instead of 3. But instead of making 2 more islands, the 4th island was just the first island with a bunch of towers Sonic needs to climb, and the 5th island was just split away from the first island. The other Coco upgrades are also poorly implemented. It's a carbon copy of what Breath of the Wild had, but in Breath of the Wild it worked because you weren't given the goal of upgrading to level 99. When I played the game, I just leveled up whenever I had enough points to level up, so I never had to bother going through this menu like 50 times in one sitting. It's weird too because Sonic Unleashed has the exact same upgrading system as Frontiers, but it's optimized to be much more efficient, and they couldn't just copy off of that? And as hype as the Titan boss fights are, they aren't the smoothest experience, with music cutting and animations not being up to standards. Frontiers even does this thing in optional cutscenes where characters have poor stock animations. In a big game like Yakuza with lots of dialogue, that's forgivable, but in a shorter experience like Sonic Frontiers, it's insane to me how little time they had to animate everything. There isn't even much to animate, they're just standing around talking. Yet, I can see that Sonic team are really talented. Look at some of these animations, they're beautiful. And it really sucks how they're not given the manpower or the time to give the entire game this quality of animation. At a certain point, they also stopped animating flashbacks, probably because they didn't have the time to build 3D models, so they opted for tweening 2D art instead. Back to the gameplay side, some springs can be homing attacked and others can't. The stomp aura isn't straight. Why is there a sheep herding minigame in Sonic? Characters have awkward pauses between lines.
電脳空間って言うらしい。この島怪しいぜ。お前こそここで何してるんだ？
There are just so many little quirks to weigh the game down. This isn't all of it. It's only a fraction. Sonic Frontiers isn't a game I recommend to people. I was extremely disappointed when it released. Heck, I was extremely disappointed when the first gameplay dropped. And while I thought there were ideas that could definitely work, it was ultimately bogged down thanks to a rushed production schedule. Yet, I don't know. I'm satisfied at the same time. Now I'm pretty sure all of you are questioning my title. I'm complaining about Sonic Frontiers a lot, yet I call it my game of the year. Well, here comes your answer. There's an inherent fun when you're a super fast character with the freedom to run anywhere, but I don't think the game design specifically contributed to this. The game would have been even more fun if I found the game design good, but running around as Sonic, launching off ramps and setting goals for myself to try to get from point A to point B in an unconventional way, or trying to defeat enemies as fast as possible was fun, I won't deny that. If you're creative enough, I think the game is fun. I just don't think the intentional game design from the actual developers is fun. And plus, Sonic has been in a really bad place for the past 10 years. Sure, the movies are doing great, but with how they characterize Sonic, it's ultimately a series that panders to kids and adults who grew up during the Jim Carrey era. Even games created by reliable developers have fallen flat. Mania is really good, but I think the fact that it's this retro Sonic game that doesn't innovate too much made it big in the fanbase, but the general public were probably waiting for something fresher. This is the first Sonic game since Generations to give a positive impression to the general public. And not only that, they tried to make Sonic cool again. The Titan boss fights are sick and the music is some of the best in the series. And while I found the game disappointing, most Sonic fans seem really happy with what they got. The game is also the best-selling Sonic game in Japan since Adventure 2, and I think the series really needs to do well in Japan if they want to continue developing the games in Japan. The marketing for Sonic Frontiers has definitely been much more aggressive compared to Forces. It makes no sense for such an iconic character to be developed in Japan if no one in Japan cares about him. So it was really nice seeing the Korone promotion and the recognition it received at the Tokyo Game Show. Sonic as a franchise has been clowned on for so long. Growing up and having people tell me Sonic sucks or that Sonic is for kids, but also seeing Pokemon hit record-breaking sales or Jurassic World Dominion being the second highest grossing film of 2022 despite there not being a good Jurassic Park film since the original, really disheartens me. Yet there's a good amount of people who go Sonic was never good, there's people who say Sonic can't work in 3D, there's people who say Sonic shouldn't have a big cast of characters.
The 3D genre of video games ruined the Sonic franchise.
Just general criticism that isn't even criticism. Oh, remember when Sonic was given a sword? That's such a bad idea. People don't realize that Sonic's failure was not its ideas but its execution. And even well-executed things such as Sonic Adventure 2's story was clowned on. I have no doubt that we had the past 10 years of poorly written Sonic stories as a response to people saying, well, Sonic can't be serious and mature. Yet recently we got this funny cat movie that deals in mortality and anxiety, and people love it. So it was kind of a relief when I heard IGN's review of Sonic Frontiers, and they commented positively on how the characters were written, how they liked that the characters were taken seriously and actually given depth. It's a relief that both fans and the mainstream are enjoying a Sonic game. Sonic is my favorite franchise and has been a part of my life since I was a kid. It's simply just too draining to sit there and be all grouchy over how the series isn't good anymore. Instead, I want to be the glass half full guy. I'll still voice out my criticisms, but at the same time, hold on to the positives much stronger. This cute selfie of Azuka and Maekawa is all I really need right now. Sonic Frontiers has sold 2.5 million copies worldwide within just a month, which is quite the accomplishment for the series. I think it sold more copies than even Mania did in its first month. Then there were also the recent job postings released for Sonic Team. As I've mentioned before, 60 team members is nothing for a game so ambitious. It should have been closer to like 200 developers. While the game may not have been the best, the effects are already showing. I'm really hoping Sonic Team are able to build off the success of Frontiers. I hope Sonic Team expands into something Sonic deserves. I hope Ian Flynn gets more freedom with his writing and collaborates closer with Sonic Team for the next game. I'm pretty sure he didn't write the whole story, I think he only wrote the script based on story beats provided by Sonic Team. After Frontiers, everyone seems hopeful for the future of the franchise, even Sonic Team themselves. If you play the game in hard mode, you'll get a unique final credit song. This song is called One Way Dream, and it's sung by Nate Wants to Battle. The lyrics of the song are a message directly from Sonic Team, letting fans know that the direction of the franchise will no longer be heading down, and that they've learned from all their mistakes. While I wouldn't take that as a guarantee the next game will be good, the idea of them embedding the message into the credits of a game that brought public attention back to Sonic gives a hopeful energy. They're confident they can do better and actually want to win us back. Sonic Forces felt like a cash grab. They used returning villains and an all-or-nothing plot to sell the game, and it backfired, neglecting what made Sonic appealing in the first place. I especially love how the director of Frontiers is actually on Twitter interacting with fans and taking in feedback. Again, it gives off the energy that Sonic Team cares, or at least there is someone important on the team that wants to make sure we can get the best possible games. Sonic Team are not necessarily back on track though, but they are pushing the train towards the tracks after tipping the train over and falling into the sea. I think that's what truly makes Sonic Frontiers a meaningful game, compared to Genshin Impact.
The Game Award goes to Genshin Impact. What the hell?